This episode is brought to you by Dashlane. Try Dashlane Premium free for 30 days at www.dashlane.com/infographics and never forget another password and keep all your online accounts secure. In the 1800s, when the USA was growing into the powerhouse it is today, a lot of families were getting rich. This was called the Gilded Age. Some made a fortune from things like the gold rush, while others just had great ideas. Thanks to a guy called Levi Strauss, we got blue jeans, something he invented during the gold rush for people who needed sturdier work pants. He amassed great wealth thanks to his nifty invention. Prior to this, some of the wealthiest people were plantation owners, merchants, statesmen, and then came the bankers, real estate moguls, and those working in the oil and railroad industries. In the 20th century, others made fortunes too, or should we say fickle fortunes. Some families managed to retain their wealth while others lost it all, or most of it. Those are the people we'll talk about today. The Pulitzers. We'll start with a name we think many of you will be familiar with. The reason you might have heard the name is because there's an award called the Pulitzer Prize. This is given to people who have created something great, either in literature, journalism, music, and more. But do you know why we have this prize at all? Well, that's because a man called Joseph Pulitzer gave Columbia University a bunch of money to start a journalism school in 1892. This was the world's first journalism school. Joseph had amassed quite a fortune in the newspaper business and wanted a country full of great reporters. He got depressed, sick, and died, but in 1917, his name lived on when the first Pulitzer Prize as we know it today was awarded. But that's not why we're here today. What we want to know is what happened to all his cash. The answer is his grandson Peter Pulitzer invested a lot of that fortune in an 800-acre citrus farm. But that didn't go well because the trees got sick from something called citrus canker. This is a bacterial disease that destroys the trees. We're told this would have ruined him, but the husband of his ex-wife bailed him out. That saved the citrus operation, so while Joseph didn't exactly lose it all, he would have without a little help from his friends. The Strohs. This family we doubt you've heard of unless you're a big beer fan. The story goes that a young man, Bernard Stroh, had learned how to make beer in his native Germany. But during the German Revolution he went to the USA with $150 in his pocket and a recipe to make a decent beer. At age 28 in 1850 he started a brewery in Detroit, and his son Bernard Stroh Jr. took over after him. Prohibition obviously wasn't good for these beer makers, and they branched out into non-alcoholic beer and ice cream. When that ended, the beer company just went from strength to strength, and it's said by 1978 the Strohs were pumping out 6.4 million US beer barrels to thirsty Americans. According to Forbes magazine, in the 1980s the Strohs were rolling in dough with a fortune of $700 million. Then came the decline. Apparently, the new generation got into serious debt after some shaky acquisitions. Then came some other mighty brewing companies such as Miller and Coors, and the Strohs got left behind. In 1999, after brewing beer for 149 years, the company was done and taken over by other brewers. That $700 million fortune was gone. The then company president, John Stroh III, said in a statement, "Emotionally, it was an extremely difficult one to make, knowing that it would impact our loyal employees and recognizing that it would mean the end of our family's centuries-old brewing tradition that had become, in essence, an important part of our identity." The Hartfords. So far, we haven't had anyone who lost their fortune from living what you might call a playboy lifestyle, but with the Hartfords, we do. Before we get to the big spending kid of the family, we'll tell you how these people got their money. A man named George Huntington Hartford had taken over a business called the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. While he was head of that, he branched out into grocery stores and supermarkets under the name A&P. This became massive, a name as big as McDonald's is today. In fact, you might hear it being called the Walmart before there was a Walmart. In the 60s, it was the biggest retailer of any kind in the USA, and in the 70s, it was at least the biggest chain of grocery stores. Everyone went to A&P. At its peak, it had 15,709 stores in the USA, and as you can imagine, it made the Hartford family very, very rich. They were ranked as one of the wealthiest families in the USA for a while, so what could possibly go wrong? Well, it was basically competition from more modern stores starting in the 50s. They tried to keep up but kept failing. Over the decades, it closed hundreds of its stores, got hurt badly by the Great Recession in the 2000s, and finally filed for bankruptcy in 2015. And like that, it was gone. But there was still cash around because we're talking about extreme wealth here. Now we can talk about the playboy. His name was Huntington Hartford, and according to various reports, he squandered his massive inheritance. He hung out with stars, bought fast cars, big houses, lots of artwork, and we're told he lost it all. That was the end of the Hartford fortune. The Kluges. This story begins with something called Metro Media, which was a media behemoth. It was taken over by the German-American entrepreneur John Kluge in the 1950s, and he expanded it and made a lot of money. In the 80s, he sold it to 20th Century Fox Film Studio, and at one point, Forbes had him as the richest man in America. The billionaire later turned to philanthropy and did things like invest $60 million to build the John W. Kluge Center. In fact, he donated millions all over the place. So again, what could possibly go wrong? Well, it seems Mr. Kluge was never settled in his relationships, and he got married 4 times. Now, we don't exactly know where all his cash went, but we do know that one person who did get quite a lot of it lost it all. Her name, Patricia Kluge, one of those wives. After her divorce, she got her hands on a 200-acre estate and $1 million per year in the divorce settlement. She bought a vineyard and tried to expand it, which got her in lots of debt. There was then a real estate crash that ruined her, and she declared bankruptcy. As for her vineyard, it was bought by the man who is now President of the United States, Donald Trump. The Vanderbilts. We'll finish with one of the most well-known wealthy families in the USA. Their story starts with a man named Cornelius Vanderbilt, the son of American-Dutch parents. As a young boy, he worked on his father's ferry in New York Harbor. He was only 11. At age 16, he wanted to do his own ferry business, and he borrowed a bit of cash to start his own operation, taking people between Staten Island and Manhattan. You just couldn't hold this boy back, and he was well known for his entrepreneurship. At 19, he married his first cousin and got busy at home as well as at work. What we mean by that is he had 13 kids. He eventually branched out into regional steamboat lines and ocean-going steamships, and after that built a railroad empire and all kinds of other businesses. At the time of his death in 1877, he had amassed $100 million. According to an inflation calculator today, that would be $2,382,319,635. Quite a bit of cash. And you know what? He left 95% of that to one son called Billy, because he believed this son was capable of running his empire. Billy did just that and more, doubling the family's wealth in his lifetime. But it seems this family just ran out of steam when it came to making cash, and over the years the fortune dried up. Some of the Vanderbilts over the years would do well, but none remained ultra wealthy. And that's why some people talk about the fall of the House of Vanderbilt. Is it really that good anyway to be born rich? In a book about the family, the author wrote that one of the grandsons of the great Cornelius once said, "Inherited wealth is a real handicap to happiness." There's plenty of different ways to lose your money, and we're betting that if we made this video again in 10 years, at least one family would have lost their fortune to something that's becoming more and more common every day: hacking. But you, being the intelligent infographics show viewer that you are, will rest easy because you'll have Dashlane, the one and only tool you need to keep your personal info and digital accounts safe and secure. And in addition to that, their dark web monitoring services will immediately notify you if it finds any of your personal information for sale on an online marketplace, so you can take steps to protect yourself right away. Don't be like millions of victims every day. Get Dashlane and keep your digital life secure right now. Head on over to www.dashlane.com/infographics for a free 30-day trial. And if you use the coupon code Infographics, you can get 10% off a premium subscription today. Do you agree with that statement? Tell us in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other video, Why Winning the Lottery is the Worst Thing That Can Happen to You. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.